Greece and Turkey have been embroiled in a long-standing dispute over maritime borders. Tensions have escalated since summer 2020, when Turkey actively embarked on searching for oil and gas in maritime zones, not yet delimited between the two states. Successive military exercises in the Mediterranean and the Aegean Seas have contributed to sustaining the tension in the region. Dialogue between the two states has not led to a positive outcome yet.
How is Athens' criticism against Berlin being perceived by German stakeholders? During Germany's presidency of the Council of the European Union at the second half of 2020, Berlin offered to mediate between Athens and Ankara. Taking into consideration the deep cooperation and the strong ties that both conflicting parties have developed with Germany, Berlin's stance at the conflict is inevitably important and could prove crucial. Greece has been expecting a more active engagement in support of its positions from its EU partner, Germany. Since the formation of the new German government in December 2021, Berlin's policy towards Turkey and consequently towards the Greek-Turkish disputes remains a question. How will the stance of the new German government regarding the conflict be shaped? After a long Merkel era, will the so-called traffic light coalition signal a new approach towards the burning security issues in the Aegean and the Eastern Mediterranean seas?
How do German governmental actors justify Germany's position vis-à-vis Turkey, and how do they assess Germany's mediation attempt at the height of Turkish-Greek dispute?
I first would question that the term justification is the right one, because maybe there is a need for explanation due to the great expectations in Greece that Germany would in a way follow the French example and really line up behind Greece against Turkey. But I think there is not really a need for justification, but maybe for explanation, because when we see at the end of the day, Germany's position was shared by most of the European member states. It was in a way the formulation that was later accepted also by the European councils in its repeated conclusions on Turkey. And we see that the NATO and the US very much argued in the same line as Germany. That does not automatically say that the German position is the right one or the only one, but it shows us that the German assessment of the conflict and of the way how it can be solved is shared by most of the other actors in the region. And therefore, I think what is in the background of this position? I think there is a clear perception that we have two sides in the conflicts, that both are, maybe as a matter of diplomacy, are coming forward with maximalist demands, and that there is room for negotiation and that there should be negotiation. And I think also what can be said, that the German and the US position and NATO position and also other member states are becoming meaningful, are becoming understandable when we consider that Turkey is a very important actor, a very different, a very difficult actor, but still a possible contributor to European security. And that the positioning of Turkey in the global rivalry between the US and China, between the democracies and the authoritarian regimes, is not clear yet. And therefore that we should avoid to isolate Turkey totally, and we should keep channels with communications with Turkey open.
What is their reaction to Greek criticism about Germany's neutrality and the lack of support for Greece?
I think we may not speak even of neutrality of Germany. I think the German government has clearly stated that, for example, it shares the Greek way of how to solve the conflict, namely to negotiate it, and if it is necessary, to go to arbitration or to appeal to an international court, that the laws of the sea and the customary law of the sea, UNCLOS, and the rulings of the courts should be the basis for a solution, that it makes no sense to merge maritime boundary questions with overall security concerns. What is the Turkish position? And we see it in a very concrete examples that the German government also did not agree or did not espouse the maritime delimitation agreement that was conducted between Turkey and the Libyan government. And this is also a position shared by Greece. And therefore, I think that when it comes to issues of law, who is right and who is wrong, who is in a way pursuing the right way to the solution of the problem, the German government really aligns with the Greek position. What is meant with the neutrality of Germany is naturally that Germany did not immediately support Greek actions against Turkey, and naturally did not argue for sanctions as the French did it. And I think this is due to a different assessment of the role of Turkey, but it's also due to different interests of Germany and France, for example. And I think it's legitimate for a state to look also at its own interest when it positions itself in the conflict of neighboring states.
So you wouldn't speak about a lack of support for the Greek government from Germany, or how would you describe that?
I think it's a question of perception. It's understandable that the Greek side expected much more from Germany, particularly given the example of France. But I think the Greek side should be aware that there is never a black and white picture. And the Greek side should also be aware that France acted very much in its own interest while supporting Greece. We should not forget that France considers itself as a world naval power that has a vital interest, for example, in the freedom of navigation in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is the way to the Indo-Pacific, where France has territories, troops, and huge interests. That it is France who has economic interests in the Eastern Mediterranean. When we look at Total, the energy firm, and naturally that France is viewing or facing Turkey as a rival in Africa, as a rival in the Middle East, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in quite a different way as Germany is doing it. And a last point, naturally, I think when we look at the French policy in Africa, then we see that for the French side, there is often, or there is an idea that military support and military might is also an opener to markets and to economic cooperation. And we see that the German situation is very different. Germany is one of the leading export nations, but has achieved this status always without any strong military might or military cooperation. And therefore, I think the Greek side has to see that the situation is very different, and that France acted in its own national interest, and that Germany is also acting in its own national interest without missing solidarity with Greece. Or without having in mind that there is a necessity to be in solidarity with Greece. And I think the conclusions of the European Councils had been very much, came about due to the leadership of Chancellor Merkel at that time, who was able to unite so different positions as the French one, on the one side, who see Turkey as a rival, and, for example, the Polish one, who sees Turkey as an indispensable actor in security, particularly against Russia. And I think this was a very difficult task, and Merkel did achieve it.
Mm. But what would you say? Is it possible for Germany to keep up this this stance and this way of not using hard power in its Mediterranean policies?
I think this is a very, very interesting question, and I think it has two dimensions. One dimension is the way Germany perceives itself as a power in Europe and as a power that is not used to the use of military might. And we see today that there is a lot of discussions, particularly when it comes to Ukraine. And we see that Germany, in a way, is isolated or has a Sonderweg, a way of its own, with negative connotations, when it comes, for example, to deliver arms to Ukraine. And when we have this case in mind, where the good and the bad, let's say, are very clear from a Western point of view, and Germany is not willing or not ready to give arms to Ukraine, then we should not be very surprised that Germany was very suspicious to back up Greece, for example, militarily against a NATO partner. On the other hand, the other dimension is what will happen in the Eastern Mediterranean. And I think there, not only Germany, but I think all the European governments are very much looking forward, or are very much waiting what is going on in Turkey, because we know that there will be general elections in 2023, but there might be early elections even in 2022. And there is a stronger opposition now. It's for the first time a united opposition in Turkey that has a chance to defeat the Erdogan government, a government for whom or for which there is a clear interconnection between authoritarian policy at home and expansionist and aggressive policies abroad.
I would like to go deeper inside the position of the German government towards certain issues concerning the Greek-Turkish dispute. And I would like to ask first, how would you assume the Greek position concerning borders in the Aegean and economic zones? So what would you say? Is that a reasonable position?
I'm not a legal expert, but I have talked naturally to legal experts, and it turns out to me, or what I have learned, is that the situation is very different in the area south of Greece, in the Ionian Sea, when it comes to Greece, to Crete, for example, and it's extremely different when it comes to the Aegean. In the case of the Ionian, I think, for example, the position of Turkey that islands do not have the capacity to create exclusive economic zones is not understandable, is not defendable, lacks any kind of legal ground. And therefore, I think the German government has no difficulties to align with the Greek position in this area. When it comes to Aegean, what legal experts say, the Aegean is really a case sui generis, a case it's not comparable to any other place in the world. And therefore, I think it is difficult to apply standards and accepted rules without giving it a critical thought to the Aegean. And I think this is, in a way, the Greek position. And this manifests itself in the most extreme case when it comes to the island of Castellorizo. And there we see, at least in the discourse of the Greek government, that Castellorizo, which is a very tiny island direct at the shores of Turkey, is in a way used to create a vast Greek exclusive economic zones that borders the exclusive economic zones of Cyprus and creates a kind of Greek Sea in the Mediterranean. And this is not what all rulings of the international courts demand, namely an equitable and fair solution of the maritime boundaries. And we see these Greek positions, but at the same time we see that Greece is ready to go to the international courts, and therefore there is room for negotiation and room for compromise. Unfortunately, the current dynamics, which kind of dynamics? For example, the arms race that has started in the Eastern Mediterranean distracts our attention from negotiations and attracts our attention more to who is able to fight whom and who has the upper hand in the military power equilibrium. And therefore, I think this is a wrong direction. And I think the German government very much plays an important role in insisting on negotiation and being careful not to take part in this arms race, and therefore to complement the French position. I would even go so far that the military backing of France, of Greece, was important. And I could really imagine that without this show of force of the French side, the Turkish side would have escalated even more. And therefore, I think we see a kind of complementary policy that was not, in a way, designed, that was not coordinated. And our goal should be to have a coordination of these two approaches that are not contradictory to each other, but that are complementing each other. It's necessary to show Turkey its limits, but it's also necessary to keep the channels open. And therefore, France and Germany have to play the role of the good and the bad cop.
The good and the bad cop, very interesting. But do you see the same way of dealing with this conflict when it comes to sanctions towards Turkey? The good and the bad cop?
No, I don't see it. I only see a greater willingness of France, but France has also to lose when it comes to sanction with Turkey. But we have to see that for France, the economic relations with Turkey are not as important as for Germany. Germany is in an interdependency when it comes to economies with Turkey. We are very much relying on working supply chains from Turkey, particularly the automotive industry, but also I think textile, but more so the automotive and the chemical industry. And therefore Germany cannot have an interest in the economic or politically destabilization of Turkey. Whereas France, as I said already, sees Turkey as a rival that has maybe also, really to push to its limits or maybe even weakened. And there we have different approaches. But it was not only Germany in the European Union who argued against sanctions. We see particularly that Spanish banks are the ones in Europe that are at the most exposed to the risks of the Turkish financial market, and that for Italy and for Spain, Turkey is a very important buyer of military equipment and of arms. And the same is true for France when it comes to Greece. And therefore, again, we see that when we look at Germany, there is a big hesitation, particularly with the new German government, when it comes to arms export, and therefore quite an opposite approach. France willing to develop its military might, willing to profit from its arms industry, and in Germany a complete different picture.
What would you say? How are foreign ministry and chancellor's office perceiving the problem, and do you expect tensions in the new German government when the Turkish-Greek conflict may become a hot one again or more discussed here in Germany?
I think we all know that when in the years before, when, for example, the membership of Turkey in the European Union was concerned, there had been really different tendencies in the foreign ministry ruled by or run by the Social Democrats and the chancellery run by the Christian Democratic Union. And I think we had also different tendencies maybe in the ministries when it comes to Greece in the time of the financial crisis. How to treat Greece and how harsh or how strict economic demands had been put forward against Greece or towards Greece. But I think when it comes to the conflict in the Eastern Mediterranean, I don't see really a different approach between even in the former government between the Chancellery and the Foreign Office. And I can't imagine now a different approach in the new government when it comes to this question. It might be come to some differences in the case the tensions are rising and there is really the danger of military confrontation. then we might see what we have seen in slightly, now when it comes to Ukraine, different tendencies between the liberals and the Greens and Social Democrats. But I think this is very far away, and no, I don't see. It would be speculation now to talk about this. Yeah.
Okay. Can we expect a completely different state of point of view from the Christian Democrats, who had been in power until the end of last year and now are in the opposition here in Germany, in the German parliament?
I don't think so, because particularly when it comes to economic relations, the Christian Democrats are very keen not to endanger them. And when it comes, what we have not talked about, what is often in the discussion, Turkey as a partner in the refugee question, this is also an issue where the Christian Democrats are very careful. And therefore, I don't think that we can expect a harsher position on Turkey from the side of the opposition. That means I don't think that the government will be pressed by the opposition to change its course on Turkey.
The European migration agreement with Turkey from 2016 is often criticized in Germany. And what kind of reaction of the new German government can we presume if migration numbers rise and the situation changes, and how could that affect the Greek-Turkish dispute?
I think the new German government has formulated a number of foreign policy aims or goals. For example, to carry or to exert a more value-based foreign policy, a more principled foreign policy, particularly when it comes to the relations with authoritarian states. And Turkey would be one of the addressees of this kind of policy. At the same time, the new government wants to strengthen the EU as a foreign policy actor and wants to increase the security dimension of European policy. And it wants to speak with a clearer voice towards China and towards Russia. And in all these questions, Turkey plays a role, be it the addressee of critique when it comes to human rights standards, but be it a possible partner when it comes to the alignment of the West against authoritarian states. And I think the new German government has not been able or did not have the time to prioritize and, for example, to become for itself clear what would be the most important matter according to which Turkish-German and Turkish-European relations should be designed. And I think we will need a crisis for having this kind of decision. And I think it will very much depend how these crises will evolve and who will trigger the crisis. To give an example, if the crisis in the Ukraine is increasing due to Russian actions, then naturally the role of Turkey as a security partner would be in the forefront. But if, for example, the crisis would be a crisis of renewed Turkish expansionism, of Turkish show of military force in the Eastern Mediterranean, then naturally the critical approach towards Turkey would come to the forefront. And therefore I think it's very much it depends very much on the strategy and on the actions of Turkey, which dimension of the policy approach of the new German government will play out at the end of the day. And we see that Turkey in the last month has in a way readjusted its policy. It tries to come to terms with the United Arab Emirates. It tries to deepen relations again with Israel. It starts to boost the relations with Egypt. What I see is that in the Eastern Mediterranean, Turkey tries to overcome its isolation. And the question would be, what does this mean for the Greek-Turkish relations? If Turkey is in a way de-escalating with its neighbors to be able to escalate against Greece, and I think if this would be the case, then naturally the German position would change.
It's very interesting that you say that we need a conflict so that the German government can create its own position or sharpen its own position in a way. We are in the midst of a conflict at the Ukraine border. And what would you say, can the Greek-Turkish dispute, especially when it comes to gas, become a hot one again if the Ukraine conflict goes deeper and the Russian side, the Russian government decides not to deliver gas any longer to Europe? Could that be a background when the gas exploitation in the Mediterranean can become an interesting point again?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Naturally, all agree. I'm not an energy expert, but what we see is that we have rising gas and energy prices and oil prices. But everybody is expecting that this is not a permanent issue, that it will end at the end of 2022. And at the same time, we see that particularly in a moment when we speak about rising gas prices, and when we speak about the necessity of gas as a bridge energy in the transition to the renewables, that exactly at that moment the State Department of the United States in a way withdrew his support for the so-called EastMed gas pipeline. And this clearly shows us that the conditions in the Eastern Mediterranean are not of the kind to reckon with the Mediterranean gas as a kind of to step in when for missing supply or from Russia. Why is this so? This has to do with costs. We know that the gas resources in the Eastern Mediterranean are very deep grounded and extremely expensive to extract. And at the same time, the difficult political solutions that 2 years ago or one and a half years ago brought Greece and Turkey, French and Turkey, to a kind of a point of possible escalations, is too complicated for the big oil companies really to invest a lot. And a last point, I think the European Green Deal already has shown its impact also in the financial markets. What I have read is, for example, that for oil and gas companies, it is extremely difficult, for example, to get finance at the international finance market to a reasonable price for investment in traditional energy sources, because these are not considered as sustainable, as long-lasting, and they are considered as projects that will meet with a lot of political resistance and therefore bear a high risk for the investors. And therefore, I think this chapter or this part of the story is over, and the Eastern Mediterranean is in good advice when it orients itself on renewables and investing in electricity, in interconnectors. And this is also seen by the expert as a chance for cooperation in this conflict-driven region.